Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the last CLIMOS webinar. As you might all know, CLIMOS is finishing very soon, this month actually, but you will see a lot more news from us until afterwards, because there are a lot of things still that we are working on. But today we are saying goodbye to the webinar session. You can find all the recordings in our website. And today I'm very happy to introduce you to Dr. Maia and Dr. David Wright. Maria is from Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, and David is from Trilateral Research. They are going to be presenting the Foresight scenarios for climate resilient health policy for the future. So first, David will be having a introduction of what is a Foresight scenario, an overview for you to get in the same page of everybody. And then Maria will be presenting the Foresight scenario for the CLIMOS project. So I will stop sharing and give the floor to David. Please, whenever you're ready, you can present your slides. Thank you.
Right. You see my slides, yeah? Or you see my screen, you see my screen.
Yes,
Yeah.
presenting mode is perfect.
Okay, so today I'm going to take, I hope, only 20 minutes of your time and give you a kind of overview of, well, as I say here, foresight in action. Um, and without further ado, let me just tell you how foresight is defined by the European Commission. They say foresight is a systematic approach to look beyond current expectations and explore plausible future developments. And I think these are the two key words here, plausible future. Doesn't have to be a forecast, like a probable future, but plausible. The OECD has a similar sort of definition, but I think the European Commission definition is more concise and to the point. So let's see if I go, how do I progress to the next one? Yeah, okay. Um, so I think foresight is very useful for several different reasons, and many different types of organizations use foresight for, I would say, these three main purposes: to consider plausible futures, to help in the decision-making process, and to engage stakeholders. So any organization, I think, has to have a view of what their environment is going to be like in a year or 3 years or 5 years. So foresight helps them to uh, determine more of their future. There's a couple of good proverbs that I'm sure that you're familiar with that I think are um, concise applications of of foresight. Forewarned is forearmed, and that means you need to have a picture of what have the picture of what the future is going to be like. And similarly, vigilance is the price of freedom, and that's also very foresight dependent, I would say. So who uses foresight? Lots of people are using foresight. The Shell Oil Company pioneered the use of corporate scenario planning back in the late 1960s, early 1970s. They were a pioneer in corporate scenario planning. The International Panel on Climate Change, of course, has developed many scenarios over the decades that they've been in operation, and they've provided uh, I would say worst case and even worse case scenarios. Um, the environment at 1.5 degrees more is going to create a certain environment. It can be foreseen that it will cause climate change. To at least some higher level than we're experiencing right now. At 2 degrees and at 3 degrees, the climate impacts, of course, are going to be much more catastrophic. So the IPCC has been also pioneer in developing scenarios. The European Commission itself also developed some very interesting scenarios with regard to ambient intelligence or the Internet of Things. Um, and they used an orthogonal method that I will show you in just a moment. We've used Foresight in different projects, the Swami project, Sherpa project, Athena project, and others. We think Foresight is very useful for projects that are supposed to be about research and innovation. The military, of course, uses scenarios for war gaming. Activists like Greenpeace has developed some crisis scenarios for energy, and consultants like Trilateral use foresight methods all the time. Um, I would say these are the six main types of foresight methods. These are the ones that are most used. Horizon scanning, scenario construction, Delphi's, megatrend analysis, backcasting, and road mapping. These six types of foresight methods are for sure the most used by all of the people that we just mentioned. Um, I think an important challenge in developing foresight as a methodology is engaging stakeholders. It's super important to have stakeholders engaged in the foresight process, no matter the type of method that is being used, one of those six methods that I just showed. Um, why will stakeholders want to participate in your foresight activity? Well, maybe they like the subject area. They're flattered that they are asked. They think maybe they can contribute to policy. They like interacting with other experts. Um, they want to understand the methodology for the foresight activity that to which they're being invited, and maybe they like having a monetary incentive. So, for example, the EC has a 450 euro a day rate for experts, and so maybe they could participate in a foresight activity for one day or a few days at a relatively low cost to the project. Um, a big issue also, I think, in developing foresight methods or applying foresight methods is the timeliness. Foresight is looking to the future or plausible futures, and uh, futures or events can overtake those envisaged plausible futures. So, just to provide a few more details on these different types of foresight methods, the first one, horizon scanning, basically involves scanning a wide range of materials like journal articles, surveys, blogs, policy documents, news, media, gray literature, advertising, all those sorts of sources, engaging experts in your horizon scanning process. Horizon scanning basically aims at identifying weak signals that might turn into something of significant impact on the envisaged plausible futures. And again, timeliness is a factor. So with regard to Delphis are a good exercise if you can keep the experts engaged. Delphis offer a way for experts to share their views anonymously, so with no attribution. And because their views are held anonymously, they can say whatever they want. They can express whatever view they think is going to be of most interest or most plausible future. A challenge for Delphis is keeping the experts on board throughout the process. Delphis typically go through 3 rounds, and if the 3 rounds are quite spaced apart, it will be more challenging to keep the experts on board throughout that whole process. Um, Typically there's 3 rounds of the Delphi in the Delphi exercise, where the first round asks a set of questions of the experts, and they provide their views in regard to those questions. The organizer of the Delphi summarizes or makes a synthesis of the views and um, sends that synthesis out to the experts in the Delphi, so a second round. And typically the questions will be more granular based on the initial sets of questions. And so the experts will go through basically 3 sets of questions, each round getting more specific and leading to hopefully some meaningful recommendations. Um, yeah, it's not necessary to have a consensus from the experts. It's okay to have outliers in terms of their views being quite different from most of the others participating. Um, I mean, it's desirable, or it's nice to have a consensus amongst the experts, but it's not. That's not the principal objective. The principal objective is to have an exchange of informed views. Here's a couple of projects where we used Delphi's, and I like the Delphi exercise as a foresight method. I quite like Delphi's. Um, Megatrends analysis is another type, one of the 6 methods. And in the instance of megatrends analysis, the objective is to identify some long-term structural drivers of change. So examples are climate change and aging and the digitalization of our society and economy. So those are yeah, megatrends, I would say. So the analysis is aimed at identifying those structural drivers. And in doing so, they help frame scenarios as a another method of foresight. The megatrends analysis also provides a shared evidence for stakeholders. So, typically the evidence base is made public, and so it's accessible for stakeholders. One problem with megatrends analysis as a foresight method is that it can be too general or too deterministic if it's not contextualized. Um, the impact of climate change on some particular project may be just it's something that one has to pay attention to, but it's not a driver of the project itself. So megatrends analysis can be a little bit general. A very good example of it is this report that the Commission put out last year, empowering the EU to thrive amid turbulence and uncertainty. That's a very good example of megatrends analysis. Um, I think also a factor in megatrends analysis is the credibility of the participating experts. So typically megatrends analysis will involve the views of various experts. How seriously one takes the result of that analysis, I think, depends on how credible the participating experts are. Backcasting is another method, a Foresight method, and it basically starts from the proposition, where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years? Where does the organization want to be in 3 to 5 years, for example? What kind of conditions would you want to see in 3 to 5 years? Like what would your ecosystem look like in that time frame? What would your expectation be? What steps are needed to get from there, let's say in 3 years from now, back to here? What do you need to do to get to that point? What milestones will show that you are on the right path towards that envisaged future, and also what obstacles might hamper progress. And how could you deal with those? Road mapping works, I would say, the other way around, which is starting from the point of view of the objectives. What objectives do we want to achieve? And it's desirable in road mapping to have consensus from stakeholders as well, in terms of how those objectives can be achieved. Road mapping can be a very complex exercise, a very complex process. And it also, I would say, like the other methods, depend heavily on the credibility of the inputs provided. Um, it's necessary for useful road mapping for the experts to agree on the priorities, the kind of timeline, who's going to be responsible for what, etc. And then also the road mapping process needs to build in some points where, like milestones, where a review can be made of are we on stream to make our objectives. I'll go into a little bit more detail with regard to scenarios. There's different types of scenarios, and I've listed, I would say, the main types here. One is developing orthogonal scenarios, as we did in the Swami project. I'll show you an example of that in a moment. Another type of scenario is developing a worst case, looking at the status quo in, let's say, 3 to 5 years, and what a best case might be. And I would say you see these kinds of scenarios, especially in financial planning, but other areas as well. Ethical dilemma scenarios is another type, and we had those in the Prescient project. policy scenarios, and then these what if scenarios. So traditionally or classically, I would say what if scenarios were limited in number and required inputs from the various experts. Um, Now, however, as I'm going to show you, the development of scenarios is being greatly automated. Here's a kind of traditional approach to scenario development where there's, excuse me, there's two different axes here that shape the future as depicted in these various scenarios. So there are, as we see here, two critical uncertainties that shape four distinct futures. And I mean, this is a very classical way of developing scenarios. Typically, the process involves a group of experts who get together, do some brainstorming, they draft scenarios. The scenario manager goes back to those original group of experts, makes some revisions as a result of their comments, and then runs the scenarios by even wider groups of stakeholders. And as a result of those wider groups of stakeholders making some comments, the scenario manager makes another revision of the scenario. So the more stakeholders involved in providing inputs or comments, the greater the legitimacy and credibility of the scenarios. Now, as I mentioned, AI is being used to generate scenarios. So in a way, they're replacing the physical presence of humans in developing the scenarios. Now we can see AI generating lots and lots of scenarios, well, as I say here, hundreds. And with AI, it's possible to generate new scenarios virtually in real time. So that's very useful for organizations, especially in these domains: energy, mobility, defense, healthcare. They're using AI now in a big way for generating lots of different scenarios. Nevertheless, it's the human has to be in the loop, it seems to me, partly for framing the problem. What are you developing scenarios for? What are the relevant drivers that should be taken into account? How you interpret the outputs of the scenarios, and are the scenarios actually plausible and of relevance strategically? Scenarios do have some risks. I mean, as a foresight process, it has some risks. Gaining legitimacy is important. Having adequate stakeholder involvement. Special interests might steer the scenarios in a way that they want, like as the fossil fuel industry has done for so many years. Um, and then timing is important. Some events might overtake those plausible futures. And also getting the attention of policymakers for those scenarios. That's the number one challenge, I would say. There's some other risks, which I mention here. The Turing Institute has said that no AI system can reliably predict geopolitical flashpoints like, the invasion of Ukraine or the war with Iran. So those are flashpoints that are not typically easily foreseen. Um, and There's also a risk that AI agents might escalate scenarios rapidly. And there's a very good example, a very good article on exactly this scenario where um, uh, different AI agents compete to a point where they press, or, they press for engaging in nuclear war. So um, uh, horizon scanning can be used for different purposes. As I indicate here, horizon scanning is good for identifying weak signals, early signals, and uncertainties. Scenarios are good for exploring alternative futures. Delphis are good for achieving convergence or divergence, as the case may be amongst experts. Backcasting is good for policy mapping, and road mapping is good for implementation. All of these different methods can be used in combination as well. Um, Finally, what makes for successful foresight? Well, I think it's engaging stakeholders. If stakeholders have been involved in the process, that's good. Having the support of senior management to develop this whole process, having the results of the scenarios being taken up by policy makers, senior management, stakeholders, um, using scenarios for developing better policy robustness, early identification of risks and opportunities, cross-sector alignment, reduced policy regrets. So I think all of these are good factors for a successful foresight process. And that's all. Any questions? I'm happy to take them now or later, maybe after Maria makes her presentation.
Thank you so much, David. Really insightful information about the foresight scenario in the European Commission. If anybody has any question, they can write it on the chat or directly raise your hands and ask your questions directly. I do have one for you, David. In today's geopolitical instability, how useful they are? How because suddenly a war starts, or there is like something like a climate change disaster because of some weather hazards. How do we know this scenario is still useful, and what are the indicators that show us that it might fail?
I think that's a good question. I think it's why it is desirable to develop several different scenarios under different conditions. Um, um, the different types of scenarios that I mentioned, including the orthogonal ones, the what if ones, the worst case, best case status quo ones, all of those different types of foresight methods can be employed. Um, but at the end of the day, I think what is desired is having plausible futures. I mean, to make sure that we are aware of what might happen in, let's say, 3 to 5 years.
Nice, thank you so much, David. Does algorithms, since you mentioned the AI and is keeping a lot of new scenarios, do they have this in mind?
Yeah, well, that's that's the present and future of scenario development. Definitely is using generative AI to develop lots and lots of different scenarios under all kinds of different conditions. So it's possible to tweak scenarios in virtually real time with AI.
Mm, thank you. Thank you so much. I don't see any more hand raised, so maybe we can go with the second presentation. Maria, please, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you see my screen in presenting mode?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Yeah, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here at the CLIMOS final webinar. And it is also very nice to be the second presenter because now David has already mentioned several methods of foresight that we indeed use in the project CLIMOS. This was the main work of a task within the project, and this task was co-led by me and by my colleague Patrick Fleming, who is also from Trilateral, who is also online today. Yeah, so just to give you a short also, if the slides are moving, yeah. A short context within the project. So we had specific tasks. So two tasks. One was to analyze the impact of future trends concerning an early warning system for fly-borne diseases. These two topics have already been covered extensively in the previous webinars, so I invite you all to also to check to visit the previous webinars. You will find very interesting information there, not only regarding the early warning system that the Project CLIMOS is developing or finalizing, but also different topics related with fly-borne diseases. And then based on this analysis, then we had a task to co-develop these scenarios for health impacts. And there were two main goals for this, not only to raise awareness, of course, but mainly to provide policy recommendations on these topics. So in terms of methodology, just to give you an overview, what we did, we used the participatory foresight method, and we use mainly qualitative scenarios. And this methodology, as also David mentioned, it enables a structural thinking about possible futures that contain so many different aspects, unknown aspects. And the aim was to focus on scenarios, as I mentioned, for health impacts that regard the vector-borne diseases, and we had a special focus on fly-borne diseases, and the use of the early warning system that it's also one of the main outputs of CLIMOS. So these are the four phases. This is also how I now structure my presentation, showing you, giving you a little bit of a glimpse what we did in each of these phases. So we started by identifying drivers. And here we try to make an analysis in terms of future trends. And we went a little bit beyond these 3 to 5 years that David mentioned. We went until the year 2050 because we really wanted to give a more longer perspective on the analysis. And we started with this horizon scanning that also David mentioned. We did desk research, and then we did a steeped analysis. This means that there are these different dimensions, as you see here also depicted in the picture with the steep framework. So this covers the social, technological, the economic, environmental, political, ethical, demographic aspects. And we also did an exercise, also David also mentioned this what if analysis. And what we did was to invite our own consortium partners, because they are indeed huge experts on the field. And together with them, we reflected, or we fostered their reflection on this analysis in the different dimensions related with the main topic. And also we asked them to start thinking about these dimensions. And what we did was then to once these dimensions were filled in with factors, so each of this, the social, the legal, the economical, and so on, then we started to create connections between them. And in an additional 2 other workshops that we conducted in person. The first one was online, the 2 others were in person. And the idea was then to have these connections between the dimensions, and then to start, reflecting on such connections, and then trying to put them in writing, in order to create a story that would then translate all of these connections and how the different factors connect, not only within the dimension, but also among the different dimensions of the state. And so we then said, okay, we have to translate this into these stories. And then we started to think, okay, what will be then the logic of these scenarios? And then we decided to go, as also David mentioned, this orthogonal representation using a matrix with the 4 quadrants. And in each quadrant represents a different future, a different vision of the future, so a different scenario. And we also establish the definition of the 2 axes. So in our case, we decided to go for risk, so avoiding risk and mitigating risk, and then to think about our main outcome, so the early warning system. And then we said, okay, then in the other X, then we will need to have these 2 variables, the low need to have the early warning system and the high need to have an early warning system. And when you see them put it together in the axis, we then define, okay, 4 different scenarios at this stage, just named as scenario A, B, C, and D. And you can see that the positionings of these bubbles, it's where the scenarios then are located. So scenario A, for instance, it's more concerns more risk avoidance and low need of early warning system. On the opposite, scenario D goes for more a high need and for the early warning system, and not so high degree of risk mitigation compared to, for instance, with scenario C. So this is just how we would then represent the different scenarios. And so the stories, the description of each scenario, they were co-designed, co-developed in the course of more than 2 years. And it went through the engagement with different stakeholders in a total of 11 workshops. 1 workshop was conducted with key stakeholders to initiate the process, and then followed by 10 other workshops with local communities. Here also different stakeholders were included. I will give you more details later on. But now just to focus on the first one, so the first workshop with key stakeholders. This event happened in Berlin. It was a really very intensive discussion, 2 days. We invited several participants with different backgrounds, so veterinarians, researchers, pharmaceutical industry, public health representatives, experts, of course, on leishmaniasis, patients, and advocates. And so we had all of these experts together in a room, and the aim was to really engage with these experts and explore how then the stories could be developed in order to identify later on policy relevant factors that could, of course, impact the decision of having the early warning system applicable to these different plausible future scenarios. To give you more details, we asked these experts to talk discuss about their own experience. So what is the status quo? What is the reality in terms of the early warning system? So if there are specific requests and how is the experience with the current system, the challenges that they face, and so on. And also we asked about the requirements that they would have in working with such a platform or the early warning system. So we wanted to understand if there was an ideal system, what would be then their expectations, and how would then be the integration and usability of this tool or platform. And what would be then, of course, the sustainability and the issues related with sustainability and long-term support in having such a system. We then had the representation. So this is a visual representation of the 4 different scenarios and how they ended up in positioning themselves in the quadrants. And so as you can see here, for instance, scenario A mentions something like, biodiversity is lost. We have a high understanding of the disease. There is, we now go for practices of vertical farming. This means that we have less or fewer sandflies, and therefore less, the disease has decreased. We have going on vaccines and vaccination programs. So this means that we are really with no or low need of having an early warning system, and we are really going for avoiding the risk. So this is just an example. We could go through the different scenarios. For instance, just contrasting. Maybe we can go for scenario D as a direct contrast. So we can see that there is, for instance, an increased exposure of the sandflies. Therefore, we have to we have stray dogs. There is a mismanagement of stray dogs, which increases the exposure and for the disease. There are, of course, educational programs going on, because now here we are going more in the direction of mitigating the risk. So increased educational programs with a early warning system in place where we can manage different impacts. There are protocols standardized being in place. So as you can see here, we have the different representations of the different scenarios. The different scenarios, they were of course then validated, let's say by these experts in Berlin. So we did draft a text describing what you see now represented in these pictures. And then they went to the stakeholders again for validation, let's say, of the text. And then what we did was to engage with local communities. And here we did not, so we had also developed the perfect, let's say, the perfect scenario. And we had translated this into a more common language, so that could be understandable by anyone. And we provided this input, let's say, to the local communities. And here 10 different workshops were organized, all in person, because we really wanted to have the opportunity for having a broader public engaging with us, with each other, and developing the scenarios. In total, 229 people participated, mostly, so there was almost an equal number of participants in terms of sex. And yeah, and what you can see here on this slide or in this image are the different or some of the engagement activities taking place. and the countries, for instance, where these events took place, from Turkey, Slovenia, in Algarve, so here should be Portugal, Italy, Serbia, Spain, and Croatia. So this is what you can see here in the middle was the text in tracking mode. So you could see that it was really a co-creating process. Every time we would receive feedback, we were adapting the texts, including all the feedback that we were collecting from these different events. In the end, the outcome was the 4 different scenarios presented, and you can see on the top right of each scenario, you see the quadrants, the 4 different quadrants, and where the scenario is being positioned within the axis. And so we created, no longer we have the label of scenario A, B, C, and D, but now we also gave a name to the scenarios reflecting their context, and a description of each of these scenarios. Okay, but what to do with this? So this is already a really useful tool because it gives you food for thought. If this happens, then what if this happens? But we wanted to go beyond, and so we wanted to translate these scenarios. And so by translating these scenarios, we meant by having policy recommendations that we could provide to different stakeholders, of course, mainly to policymakers, but also other type of stakeholders could use these recommendations. And so for each of the scenarios, we extracted a key message and then some policy recommendations or implications. And we organized an online workshop where we invited different stakeholders, in total 23 participants, to discuss what in each scenarios would be the key policy recommendations that we could then take from each of these plausible stories or scenarios. So here you see in the middle the concept board, the tool that we use to engage in the discussion, and then the concept board was also available after the workshop so that the different stakeholders could visit again after the event, and then because there is always some reflection afterwards, and then they would be able to complement what they have provided in terms of discussion. Here you can see a little bit a glimpse of how this discussion was vivid and how people really gave inputs into the recommendations. And then later on, the project team, so me and Podrick, we visit these contributions, highly appreciated contributions, and then we translated them. And we created then 4 different infographics, so each one related to a specific scenario. And again, the infographic, as you can see here, they have all a similar structure. And this means that there is always a positioning of the scenario within the quadrants, so that you can really situate each scenario in terms of the risk avoidance and the use of the early warning system. And then there is the title or the name of the scenario, and then a description, a short description about the story, this plausible story, followed by key messages. So again, in regard with the 2 axes. So key message when it comes to risk, key message when it comes to the use of the early warning system. And then, of course, the main focus, or for us, the main message that we wanted to pass, the policy implications and recommendations that can be taken for each of the different scenarios. So as an example, for instance, considering scenario B, which was named hyper-vigilant world. So here, for instance, some of the key recommendations are the ones that you can see on the screen. So, for instance, and some of them interesting is that if we compare the 4 different scenarios, and if we compare the policy recommendations that these 4 scenarios have, and if we had to combine them, or in a way trying to understand common policy recommendations, we would find them. So what I'm presenting now in scenario A, in scenario B, pardon, it's also can be the case that it's also reflected in other scenarios. And I think this is also a very interesting aspect of having this scenario foresight exercise, is because the scenarios, they are not working isolated at the end. If you see them in an integrated way, we can extract key information, or key, in this case, policy recommendations. So again, coming back for the example with scenario B, so these are some of the recommendations given. So invest in early warning system, AI-driven early warning system infrastructures by, for instance, establishing integrated platforms, combining multiple data sources, ensuring, of course, cybersecurity for surveillance system, but also, to support the development and deployment of AI tools that can feed data into the system. Looking at, for instance, public health infrastructure, this was also very important to have, of course, early warning systems that are embedded in the national and global health system, to have, of course, in the future, a focus that goes beyond the fly-borne diseases. In order to make them feasible to use, they have to have a user-friendly interface that anyone from a veterinarian, a health authority, or even a citizen, they can access and really use the platform and extract the necessary information. So as you can see, there are several recommendations. For instance, one that was more or less transversal to the 4 scenarios was the promotion of citizen engagement. So really to promote citizens to engage, for instance, in collecting data, in sharing data, in providing observations, and so on. Increase awareness campaigns, and also diminish misinformation about the disease and the way it can be handled by citizens and pet owners. So for instance, another one, international cooperation. We know the reality is that there is the data is very scarce, and it's being collected differently. So to have an harmonized way of collecting the data, sharing the data, unifying and put everything together, so that modeling can be done in the early warning system in a sustainable way, and so on. So my final remarks, especially in the project in CLIMOS, our aim was really to engage as much as possible with different stakeholders. In total, as I said, we had 15 workshops. We had 300 and something representatives in total. And we really targeted a space for knowledge exchange that would be then inclusive. We tried to, and I think we accomplished this, we also raised awareness about the different perspectives within the discussions that we had in the different events. And we included these different perspectives in co-creating the policy recommendations. And as David mentioned, if you have different stakeholders and a high number of stakeholders, this creates legitimacy. And I think we have accomplished this within our engagement activities. We really created realistic, effective scenarios that were based not only on the really high level expert of the stakeholders, but also on the reality that some of these persons who are not experts, but they contributed and they lived, they experienced something related with the sandfly diseases. And so their experience, lived experience, is also reflected in the development of these scenarios. And so when we envision these multiple futures, plausible futures, we give this tool to policymakers in order for them to identify possible risks. And it's also a tool where they can identify the different opportunities and how different opportunities for action to address the challenges that were described in these scenarios. So, for instance, by reading these policy recommendations, by reading the stories behind the scenarios, they can reflect how best make use of resource allocation. So they can have a proactive approach. They can start to allocate resources where they are needed in the future, because they have a better understanding about the consequences of sandfly-borne disease, especially when it comes to the use of early warning system, who can give you already an estimative about where the disease may happen. So to enhance this planning capability, it's something that the policymakers can extract from this scenarios or these policy recommendations. And so by doing this, they are also invited, reading the scenarios, reading the policy recommendations, they are also invited to think about these issues with a fresh thinking, because they are really, put to the exercise of exploring what could happen. And it's also a way for them to tackle or to be confronted with unexpected events. So they have to anticipate what to do. And here we gave them basis to do this in a better informed way. And of course, because as with leishmaniasis that does not respect borders, then it's important also to have this international cooperation. And so if the scenarios can be used by different types of policymakers, that can really reflect and engage with the different international, having this international collaboration, then policy recommendations that were made in the scenarios, they can be put it into practice, having this more international perspective in mind. And of course, this is also addressing several different challenges that we know are associated with the sandfly-borne diseases. So I guess this is everything from my side, and happy to take any questions or any clarification if needed from the work that we conducted during the CLIMOS project. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Really nice presentation and very interesting. We will be communicating all the infographics and scenarios that Maria has been adding here, and you had a sneak peek about it.